Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Yale Centre for British Art's online series, Artists in Conversation. I'm Julia Carver, and I'm Curator of Art at Bristol Museum and Art Gallery in the UK. I'm really chuffed to welcome Jadé Fadojutimi to speak with me today. Before we start, there are a couple of housekeeping notes. Please be aware that this programme is being recorded. Your camera and sound are muted and will remain so throughout the programme. We'll be using the Q&A function located on your navigation bar to gather questions for Jadé later on, and they will be answered at the end of our conversation. Please feel free to submit your questions at any time. If you'd like to use closed captioning, a live transcript is available by clicking the icon on your navigation bar. So Jadé was born in London in 1993. She's a British artist of Nigerian heritage. Her abstract paintings are often monumental in scale and make use of elements such as layers and disparate marks that create a sense of continued transformation. She refers to her paintings as emotional landscapes, in which she questions everyday experiences, memories, and self-knowledge. In her interrogation of identity and how it informs and is informed by one's surroundings, Fadojutimi is fascinated by the way we adorn ourselves with clothes and accessories to construct a sense of ourselves. Fadojutimi also draws inspiration from specific locations, cultures, objects, and music. She's fascinated by Japanese anime, and indeed has had a residency in Japan and has had shows there. Since completing her MA with the RCA in, I think, 2014, Jadé?
2017.
Okay, sorry. She's had an incredibly hectic career. She's appeared in the Liverpool Biennial, the Venice Biennale, as well as solo shows at Pier Gallery, 2 at Pippi Holdsworth, the Hepworth in Wakefield, and she's now represented by Gagosian. She's exhibited internationally too, as I mentioned, in Japan and the US, and I think I'm missing something there. So welcome, Jadé. I'm going to start by looking at a suite of your paintings from your quite an early show, actually, the Gesture show at Pippi Holdsworth Gallery in 2020, and that's Gesture with a J. We'll come on to that shortly. Jennifer Higgy describes your paintings as replete with growth of potential. And I think this is a great painting to start that conversation. For me, so much of your work is pure, visceral, retinal pleasure. Colour and light flood the canvases. Elsewhere, there's a cool sense of quiet. Let's look at this painting. It's a cascade of bold reds, pinks, oranges that swirl around. Can you remind me of the scale, as you work on a really large scale quite often, don't you? Most of the time.
This painting, I believe, is actually 110 centimeters by 140 centimeters. Yeah, so it's actually one of my smaller works.
Yeah, that's a good starting point. How do you get started when you paint? I mean, do you begin with a form in mind, or do you make a mark and follow on from there?
Usually my studio is filled with drawings, a few quotes on the walls, and the furniture and the plants and the clothes in the space inform the ideas before I start a painting. I see my drawings as notes for the painting, so usually I'll pick a drawing or a few different drawings where something interesting is happening, and then that will engage the beginning of the painting, but it will leave it by the end of the work. Yeah.
So you've got this sort of mass of influences around you in the studio.
Yes, I do.
And for me, colour is what strikes me first with your work. Is it an emotional gravitas for you? Not gravitas, but resonance for you in colour? The use of colour, I mean.
I think it's possible to feel colour. I don't know if I describe feeling colour through the same language we use for basic emotions like sadness and happiness. But to be moved by it is something that I believe is possible, and I'm often moved by color in everyday life. I think I think I already said in a past interview once that growing up as a kid, it was something I would notice the most, and it would often decide whether I would get on a certain bus, because back then we had red and yellow buses, not just red buses. Being from London, that's just one example. It seems so trivial, but actually it's small decisions like that that I like to kind of embrace a lot in the studio and focus my energy on. And I think that's where my engagement with color came from, noticing that it would actually move me to make different choices in life or to pick something. I don't know, I think a lot of our identity comes from the colors we surround ourselves by as well.
Yeah, yeah. So incidentally, what color bus did you
It's not that
always want?
interesting. I was like 6, it's not. But there was this weird adamance I had about, not 6, sorry, it must have been a bit older when I could take the bus to school, but it did navigate me more than it would other people, I would say. Like I would miss buses just to get on the yellow bus. But I don't think at that age I really understood that there was more meaning than that, than I would place behind it. But I'm quite stubborn when it comes to color, even in my closet as well. And it's usually the reason why I'm drawn to something a lot. It's the first thing I notice.
Great. Yeah. Thinking about emotion as well, and thinking about Linda Nochlin on Joan Mitchell, who I know you admire. Nochlin said her paintings forcefully help establish the notion of a feminine other, energetic, angry, excessive, spilling over the boundaries of the formless, the victimized, the gentle, the passive, but battling at the same time those other familiar demons, chaos and hysteria, the kind of risky ad hoc structure. And for me, many, but not all, of your paintings resonate with joy or exuberance, which I interpret as joy. Now, my understanding is that a lot of the paintings that were in that show Gesture were made during lockdown. And I think you have 2 studios, is that right?
Yes, I currently have 2 studios.
And do you want to talk a bit about your? I was thinking about lockdown because it was such a strange time for everyone, and I just wondered how different lockdown was for you because you spend time in your studio. Was it a kind of sanctuary for you?
I think by the
What's your what sort of when do you tend to go to the studio? Do you go every day? Do you go in the evenings or?
I think during lockdown, I experienced just as much anxiety as other people did. So, as much as the studio would have been nice to have seen as a sanctuary, in the beginning, I wasn't even going because I was quite nervous about getting ill. But I
Yes.
think that manifested into putting a lot of energy into the home I was renting at the time and making that a space to focus my energy on drawings. And so I found that for the first month, I was actually at home and I was just drawing quite obsessively, which is actually what started the show Gesture that you're talking about earlier. And then it wasn't until things, I think we all found, not that we ever got used to it, but it was less unfamiliar.
Yes.
Like I'm talking about. And so people were going back outside. It was only when I returned to my studio, it was still kind of locked down, but not the peak of it, I would say. That was when I started to see the benefits of maybe not being able to travel. And I had a distraction. I had a project, which was a new studio at the time that we hadn't yet made into a space that was workable. And that space became an exciting way to think about the space in relationship to the paintings, and it becoming more of a space that is a bit more interactive than just painting. And that was fun. And it became a safe space from that experience.
Yes. Is that kind of a sanctuary, would you say?
I never would call a studio a sanctuary, just because there's a lot of pain and sweat that happens when you're actually struggling with making work. It's not all, yeah, but it definitely was a privilege and a luxury compared to many other people that only had a home space. I was quite lucky in that sense, and it became a sanctuary, which is not just me, for a few of my close friends as well. Yeah. And then the second space you're talking about is just a newer space, because we're running out of space in that old space. The one that I built up during the pandemic doesn't hold 3 by 5 meters.
So you need
Very well.
space to
So it's
to.
more practical. Yeah.
And you made drawings, you were saying, in the lockdown when you were first sort of isolating at home.
I think it was the longest concentration of time that I'd focus my energy purely on just drawings. Usually I would be drawing, but it wouldn't be, I wouldn't come out with 100 drawings by the end of a month's work of drawing, usually. But yeah,
that's prolific.
It was a coping mechanism, and but also a moment where I discovered a new medium, which was oil pastels at the time. And that has become a main part of my work now. So it's a right.
Yes, you can draw with color with oil pastel, can't you?
I mean, there's many other drawing supplies that allow you to do the same, but I think there's just something about oil pastel and the way that the pigment is just so rich that feels so close to paint that makes it quite enjoyable for me. And pigment sticks as well, but that's in the painting side of things.
Does drawing feed into your finished work, or I mean, are you drawing things that you're feeling at the time? Does that kind of come into, say, a work like Vital Abundance, or is it
I think
a
it's
compulsion for you as well?
I think it's hard to say. I think that because all my paintings are quite individual, to me at least. So yes and no. It depends on the actual painting itself. So there's some that are more abstract than others. But there's always going to be some sort of form or drawn element in a painting that anchors it down to some sort of familiarity for me. And that's quite an important aspect of my practice.
Yeah, that leads us quite well on to this work, My Fissured Glow, which was also in the gesture show. And for me, I mean, I'm not trying to identify figurative motifs in your work, but nevertheless, sometimes that you when looking at work, you do sort of, and here I see the beginnings of a face, and it has a much sparser feel. It's very linear, oil pastel, I'm thinking, mix of paint and oil pastel, but very open spaces on the canvas. And also the sense of, like here, sort of splintered or cracked glass. But I wonder if also it's your title that's making me think in that way. And I wanted to talk a little bit about how you use language in your titles. For me, they're kind of portal to what's going on in your work. I was thinking about Gillian Ayres, and she used to say that her titles came afterwards, even in quite an arbitrary way. Sometimes a family member would suggest a title for her. I know that's not the case for you. I remember when we were talking before, you mentioned that one of your tutors had taught you, encouraged you to write. And I think writing is important to you, isn't it?
Yeah, I would say during my time at the Royal College was when I was encouraged to write the most, just because we had to do a dissertation at the time. So we had personal writing tutors temporarily. Um, I don't think that experience of doing my dissertation or the writing surrounding it necessarily made me believe I was a decent writer of any sort. But it definitely got me interested in language. It got me appreciating how I can describe the world through my own perspective. And that's where I wrote a text called The Window or My Window. I wish I had it done correctly. And that actually came out of my dissertation and became an individual text. And it's that moment where I started to think about painting through an everyday object I see every day, but intertwining that with my experience of this kind of melancholic resonance with being and yeah, and looking beyond and it reflecting you. Anyway, I won't go into that text too much, but it was that text that helped me enjoy language in a more, what's the word I'm looking for? More intimate way.
Yeah.
To think about how I could describe a very abstract experience through words is one of the things I found quite exciting about titling the works. And just like the artist you're talking about earlier, I also title closer to at the end of finishing a painting, usually. Sometimes in between, but most likely at the end. And if it has to come naturally, I think that's usually what can be quite stubborn about titling works. If it doesn't feel natural, then I'd rather leave it for quite a while before I title it.
Yeah. Yeah, that kind of organic process, organic creative process.
Yeah.
And I was thinking of the earlier show before Jest was called a brilliant title, The Numbing Vibrancy of Characters in Play. I love that. Just sort of feels like the vibrations of the colors of your paintings. And I know it was a reference to the relationships between the motifs in your paintings. But for me, it also works as a really great description of the way you use language. Do you keep a diary while you work? You did just mention that your studio has a lot of text around it.
Yeah, I would say the paintings and the writings and the drawings together are probably an abstract diary. But a written one, I'm not writing in my studio, dear diary, today I did this, this, and this, but I do just play around with language through just whatever's on my mind or something that I'm thinking about the work or painting as a whole. It's quite sporadic and it's between the walls of my studio, my notebooks, my notes on my phone. Yeah. So I guess I kind of do. I'd say I write. I write just because I have the urge to. And together maybe they form a kind of diary, but not in its most literal sense.
Yeah, more of a kind of working process, really, something that you're doing
I mean,
holistically.
they don't dictate how I'm feeling at the time or where I am. But they do linger into the mindset behind maybe something that's been lingering as a question I've had for painting or my work or myself. And it's just an afterthought of maybe a question I've been writing about before. Everything's quite interconnected. But I say it all looks a bit dyslexic, to be honest with you. How it's just all over the place.
It's
It's not
your own working.
it's not an easy task for an archivist, let's put it like that.
Sorry, I didn't quite catch
It's
that.
not an easy task for an archivist.
But hopefully it will be there for archivists in the future. I went to see the Mark Cousins film about Wilhelmina Barnes Graham last night, and there's a few quotes from her diary, and he was looking at a sketchbook that hadn't been seen before, which is always such a joy. But anyway, I digress. So what I also wanted to say was that you invent words too, don't you? So I mentioned gesture at the beginning when we opened up, and that's gesture with a J, mingling jest with movement gesture. Do you want to talk a bit about that?
Yeah, sure. I guess, what do you want to know? Where the play on the J came from, or?
Well, I think I can kind of understand what you're doing there.
It's got
Especially,
nothing to do with my name. Absolutely nothing to do with my name. Just putting that. No, I think I don't know how much I want to go into it, because I don't want to break it apart to bear
take away the
talk.
magic.
But for me, it's quite punny.
Mm,
I think a lot of my titles are funny to me, or punny to me, or commenting. Like, I think they're quite geeky. So but I was thinking about also the role of being someone that entertains, and so it's a play with that word mixed with the movement behind the paintings themselves. And I just thought, to jest at something, to be anyway.
Yeah, jest and gesture.
I think I'm quite embarrassed to talk about the origin of my title, because I wouldn't say they're as interesting to others as they are to me, maybe. And then vaguely embarrassing when I realize it's not.
I beg to differ.
I remember at the time, I mean, I like, something that I enjoy about language is when you take two things that are completely unrelated and you force them to have a relationship, and those words together kind of create an idea of a word to encompass it all, but you can't quite grasp. I think that kind of mimics everyday life for me a bit. But we're not often thrown into one moment, but many experiences at once, and they kind of collide in the middle. And I think that's where my titles start to merge words together, to capture that collision in life a bit more.
Well, they work really beautifully for me. I see them as sort of independent to the work, but really closely linked. And my analogy would be lyrics and music. But I don't want to kind of dwell too deeply on that. We'll move on to the next slide. Thank you, my love. I'd never have discovered it without you. And this is in contrast with Fissured Glow's sparseness, I think. For me, as a real outpouring of joy in the kind of diamond shape and the wonderful pink, orange, and reds. And there's these kind of explosions of scribbled, displaying flower forms, I would describe them as. And this is where I was thinking about something that Lucy Lippard said when she was writing about Eva Hesse. And she was writing about sculpture, actually, but I think it's interesting when thinking about your work and this work particularly. She talks about the absence of a form-content dichotomy, where a single form often combines image, shape, metaphor, and association, triggering an erotically suggestive aesthetic experience. And I can really feel this in your work. And in this particular work, there are suggestions, as we've been talking about, of some forms, but they're not concrete, and we don't have to fix them to that. But there's just a sense of joy in this picture as well. Not picture, painting. Should we talk a little bit about the materials you use. I saw you talking to Matthew Collings, and it's quite a long time ago, that interview, but you were talking about liquin, and I didn't know what that was. And could you describe that and what that contributes to your work, what it enables you to do?
To be honest, I think the work doesn't even exist without liquid. I think I realized that this year. I can't make a painting without it. So it's really the main ingredient to all my paintings. It's just what we call painting mediums, just other substances that allow the paint to take on a different form, whether that's glossy, slightly more transparent, which is what liquid does. It makes it a bit more satin and more transparent. It depends how you use it. But usually it's used for I wouldn't say it's a glaze, but it does what glazing does a little bit. But I use whole tins of it. And it's usually more liquid than paint. And I think actually it's most of the time the other way around. And I don't know how to describe how I would necessarily use liquid in a particular painting, because I think painting is a bit like cooking. I wouldn't be able to write a recipe book, but I can definitely feel, depending on what kind of mark I want, the ratio of liquid to paint. And yeah, but I think it's a lot to do with liquid. Liquid creates the overall texture of the painting and allows my language to flourish. But it's to do a lot with mixing everything together, I would say, and cooking in an artist's kitchen.
Yeah, I like that analogy to cooking and recipes. But there's a real translucency to your work. Is that helped with the liquid? And it looks so smooth and fluid. It just really, I wondered if that was what it was doing. And you use oil pastels as well with the
Actually,
painting, don't you?
In this work, oh yeah, this is from Gesture, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah, I would use oil pastel to draw it directly into the painting. There's nothing technical. But I think that was something that I enjoyed most about drawing during the pandemic, was the direct touch of the pastel to the paper and bringing that onto the canvas directly. It was weird to use brushes, and I think that's when I decided to pick up a pastel and draw directly onto my canvases themselves. So a lot of these have come out of open experimentation and being happy with the results.
I'll move on to There Exists a Glorious World. Its name is the land of sustainable burdens. And I sort of felt that there's a body of work, they're all quite distinctive, but they do share concerns, it seems to me. And this image, well, it makes me think of a planet or a comet or a cubist face, the way that the cubists quite often painted a sort of flat face, kind of truncated from a conical form. And then you've got these pinks and indigo floral forms again, or petal forms. And I was just thinking about how all of these works seem to also be thinking about there's a positivity there, as Jennifer Higgy says, but there's also a sort of cautionary note that comes through in the titles, like this land of sustainable burdens. And I think what I'm getting to really is the body of work that you then produced for the Hepworth. I'm going to show Obsession, which was acquired by the Hepworth. It continues this sort of gorgeous mosaic-y cascade of petal forms. There seems to be a kind of bird-like form here, but then at the bottom, what looked to me like skeletons of plant forms. The Hepworth acquired this, and then you had your show there, and it's got a great title, but this time it comes from Peter Walburn's Can We See the Colour Green, because we have a name for it. And I think this is an installation shot from that show. And right in the middle there is the monumental Empress of Plants. So vital abundance and sustainable burdens seem to me to be hinting at what this show seems to me to be about, which is the climate emergency. I think most of the work was created in 2022, which was again pivotal in the way that the lockdown year was, in that we had that stifling heat wave. And we'll come on to one of your paintings that I think directly references that shortly. But let's talk a bit about Empress of Plants. Now, am I right in thinking this is 3 meters high by 8 meters wide? That's the dimensions I've got there.
Yes, that's correct.
So this was painted on panels and configured in the Hepworth, and it's got these thrilling gliding horizontals, rich greens. It sort of conveys to me the coolness of walking through a forest, or even thinking about a rainforest, with light coming through the foliage, or the sensation of stained glass, light coming through a stained glass window in a cool church. And I wondered if you'd talk a little bit about, well, first of all, your work being acquired by public bodies. You've got work in Tate, haven't you? And you've also, the Hepworth acquired Obsession, and I'm guessing that you've got quite a lot of work in public collections now.
So you want me to talk about my work in public collections?
Well, just as an aside, really, I mean, did the Hepworth acquiring Obsession inspire the invitation for you to have a solo show there?
Oh, they weren't, I mean, I think I can't, it's been quite a while, so I can't remember the order of conversation. But I think during the time when we were considering having a show there, I was having a lot of studio visits, not a lot, but a couple. And I think it was during, I think it was the other way around. It wasn't that they wanted to work and then they offered me a show. It was, I was offered a show and then I can't
And then
remember.
they purchased the work.
It doesn't really matter.
Yeah, yeah.
But no, that was quite normal at the time. I was having a lot of interest from public institutions. And at the time, the work was, I would say, not easier to place, but because in its absence, there was more museums and public collections that were collecting my work at the time. But I wouldn't know what to say as to if you're asking me how it makes me feel, because I think I have imposter syndrome. So
Oh, yeah. Well, that's I think I would hope that being in public collections would help to allay that, because your work is there then forever, and it will come out again and again, and you know that it's going to be in a safe place. And
I think I only feel it when I'm in front of it. I think what was really amazing about my work being in the Tate is that it was an institution I've visited since I was at school.
Yeah.
And be across from one of my works, I remember thinking that was pretty outstanding at the time. But I think after a while, I'm not saying I got used to it, but I think the distance from the actual institutions themselves just removes that moment a bit. But having my work in Hepworth, I got that experience again with an obsession, the
Yeah.
painting that before. But I'm more excited for other people to have access to the work when it comes to public collections. I think it has less to do with how I feel about it and more to do with the people being able to experience it, because a lot of people say they want to see my work in person, and that's often not possible unless you can travel or an institution in your side of the world has a work. So for that reason, yeah,
And Tate's, as you say, you went there when you were growing up, so it's the place that's going to really widen access to your work. So I guess it's probably in the Arts Council collection too. It should be anyway. And with Empress of Plants, coming back to the actual painting, where is this? Do you know? Have you still got this?
I do know where it is, and it is, but I'm not going to say because I think I'll get it wrong. I don't want to give misinformation. But it is in a public collection. Yeah, not a private one. So
Oh, that's fantastic. I'm glad to hear that. And this body of work for the Hepworth is this when you were beginning to experiment with contingent colours and pigments, that the pigments that will fade? Am I right in thinking that, or is that some?
what, this piece in general,
Well,
specifically?
my understanding is that it's 40 degrees, but is it, or was it this piece, or
So what was your question? Was it this piece?
when you started to experiment with pigments that fade or change over time?
Oh, you're talking about interference paints. Not they don't fade, but they change color
Mm,
based on the light in the room throughout the day and how it changes. Um, I think a lot of my paintings were using those pigments before, but I think it was overwhelmingly noticeable in the Hepworth show
mm,
because of the scale of the work. Because alongside this painting, there was also a 3 by 5 meter. So it wasn't alone in its scale. It's across, it's not in the image, of course, but it is in the room. Yeah, and with the window in the space as well, because that work had a lot of good natural light.
mm,
That was one of the incentives for making sure that I embraced that pigment and what it
mm,
could do during the day compared to the night.
mm. No, this is the detail of that work. So I'd misunderstood that because I was relating, although I still think that this show is related to the climate emergency, um, and the titles that you have in the show continue that sort of what I sometimes detect as a note of caution in your titles, the sort of potential, but the caution and how to protect a smile is the potential for joy and happiness, which comes out of the color and the mark making in this work. But it still strikes a cautionary note with me as well.
It's it's funny that you keep saying joy but caution at the same time.
Mm,
And I think it was kind of, I mean, I'm going to say the joy part is probably very specific to you, and I hope that it's open to everyone how they feel about my use of color and work.
mm,
Um, but what I was going to say was the titles at the time, they really were about kind of amplifying what was being felt. It wasn't too far from when the pandemic was at its peak. And I think one of the things that came out of it was being able to have more time to focus or notice the changes in just having more time to ourselves gave us more time to notice everything surrounding us and our environment. And I remember at the time, for the first time being in the UK for a longer period of time, because I used to travel a lot. I was kind of taken by the climate change. I mean, the UK doesn't have the most reliable weather, but at least we had boundaries with our temperatures and our seasons that still made it familiar. And I think struggling in the result of climate change, not compared to the most of the world, of course, but having it directly affect me, I think it was one of the things that was maybe at the forefront of my mind at the time. And you are right about the titles. They kind of linger on this narrative. Caution maybe isn't the word that I painted them with. So I say it's interesting that you've seen it like that. But now that we're looking at the titles together, I can completely understand. But I think for me, I think it's this play between dark and light, sad and unhappy, opposite ends of the spectrum kind of meeting each other, embrace and letting go. And I think that is maybe what you're leaning towards a bit more, that they have this energy, but they're not always out of a sense of darkness.
Yeah, yeah. And that brings us to, I'm sorry, I didn't bring up the detail of how to protect a smile, but here it is for everybody. Before we look at 40 degrees centigrade Celsius, which I think is what we've just been talking about, really, that heat wave. And there was a heat wave during the pandemic lockdown as well, wasn't there?
At least in the UK.
Pardon?
At least in the UK.
Yeah, yeah. Do you want to say anything particularly about this work?
I think when you were talking about that diary element of my work, I think this is one of those paintings that kind of highlights that chapter, or a particular chapter that maybe everyone experienced at some point in the UK. I'm talking about specifically, but which was just, I mean, I'm not going to go into the weather, but yeah, I think it was also, I think what I enjoy about this painting is not, it kind of had a sense of panic in it, especially when making it. I call it one of my speed paintings. So work that I do from start to finish, which is wet on wet. And I'd say that the painting itself kind of highlights a bookmark in this era for me, of life, but also I think I think if there's a better way to describe my work as kind of a visual diary, it'd be these moments that other people can pinpoint as being relevant to an experience that they've already had, and it's a shared one. And that's why I don't really like to call my work a personal diary of sorts. I think it's a kind of a diary that interweaves itself with other people's personal experiences. And that can't ignore big global changes either, which is why the Hepworth show ended up being a show that was focusing a lot on climate change. If you think about what was happening in 2022, to be honest, it's weirdly too close to remember. I always remember what happened further, a while back. But it resonates with what I think was the main heated discussion. I mean, we've been having this discussion for decades, but we've only been really experiencing the true absurdity of what the climate can do in our own home, at least in the UK, recently in the last couple of years. So I think, you know, a lot of my paintings are meant to, although they comment on past experiences, they do merge with the present and overlay in conversation in that sense. And I think that abstracted environment comes from in the end. But yeah, 40 degrees C literally just, I think, documents. I didn't make it on that day. It was way too hot, but
yes.
but I definitely could not forget about it. And it interfered in my life in a way that I felt like I had to make note of it through painting.
And this is a detail, and this is an image of it on display at the Hepworth with a portal through to another gallery with Hepworth sculptures. And I am aware that I haven't really talked to you about working with other artists or other artists that you're interested in. I think there's possibly time to do that now, or we could talk about that. I'm suddenly realizing it's 10 to 6. So we'll need to go to questions. So we can talk a bit about other artists if you want to. But we do have a preview of your show coming up at Gagosian in New York, in Chelsea, in their Chelsea gallery. And I just wanted to show this work, The Generosity of Trauma, which I think that kind of is a good follow-up from what we've just been talking about. So the new show is called 12, A Goosebump of Memory. And again, I see quite a flow of ideas in the work that you make. Do you want to say a few words about the show coming up?
Sure. Yeah, I have a show opening at 21st Street in New York. Yeah, on the 7th of November. And as you said, the show title is 12, A Goosebump in Memory, which is a collection of a series of paintings that I've been working on this past summer. And yeah, I think it will encompass a bit more to do with the element of soundtrack in my practice, or at least give people an insight into how that feels to be in the studio with music and my work. Yeah.
Great, thanks, Jadé. I think we probably should go over to questions now. So I'll stop sharing and have a look at what we've got, because I can see there are 9 already and they will probably generate more. But thanks very much for bearing with my questions. So let's get started. I don't know which order these are in, so I'm just going to go with somebody's asked, are these oils, and I think that's been answered.
Actually, some of the paintings are mixed between acrylic oil and oil pastel and oil bars or pigment sticks. Yeah.
Someone says, you've talked about your ways into painting. Where do you decide when works are finished or to leave them?
I don't know if this works for everyone, but for me, it's the moment the painting forces me out of the position of being an artist into the position of being a viewer. So by that, where I find myself looking at the painting longer than I'm working on it, that's usually an indicator that it's almost finished. And if I'm not I'm an intuitive painter, so a lot of it comes from feeling the energy to actually paint. If that energy doesn't come back and I'm still engaged with it just as equally as the start, then it's usually finished.
Now we have a question. What are your thoughts about the term woman artist today in 2024? And has your work ever been described as feminine?
Oh, no one's ever described my work as feminine, actually. No one has, which is quite surprising to me. Not because it is feminine, but it just seems like something that might come up. But I think I'm not alone in the thought that I don't think there's a necessity to put too much weight on the fact that on gender, but at the same time, I can understand why, compared to the past, why it's something to be celebrated as well. So I think I'm kind of in the middle about it. I would prefer a world where there's no need. I mean, we don't say male artists of today, do we? So, but it's not the way the world is. So and it's not likely to change. So, which is a bit, I don't think there's anything negative about it. I just think it's a shame that we have to rely on certain aspects of being ourselves to kind of gain attention, or the absence of that attention has been because of who we are. So I think it's a positive thing, but not a necessary thing.
Some comments here. Your choice of color is so vibrant and beautiful. Your work has such a force of movement and color, like stepping into a symphony, which one feels will continue beyond the moment of the painting. There's one about influences, which we didn't cover. So I wonder if someone has asked, as a student, who were your influences and whose work were you drawn to?
As a student, I'd say Laura Owens was someone I looked at a lot, and Makiko Kudo is always going to be my go-to painter. Japanese, I just said it myself, female painter. And I liked a variety of artists, Phoebe Unwin. I'm trying to think of who I liked back when I was a student. I looked a lot at Japanese painters and UK-based painters. I liked a lot of the generic artists, but I say that like Monet, Hockney, and so forth. But I think Laura Owens and Makiko Kudo were my two. They were the painters that made me feel like I should never stop painting. Yeah, painter's envy.
That's a lovely answer. I like that I should never stop painting. Perhaps something related is what inspires you most?
What inspires me most? Oh, I think it'd be hard to say just one thing. I'm guessing inspires me in terms of painting. I think it's traveling. Being able to travel to Japan specifically. Japan is probably the biggest. I can never get enough of going. I go back every year to paint, and draw and write and kind of recharge. But I'd actually say that I think my soul is kind of now bonded to the country. And I think I'd love it to be my main place of residence one day for a little bit, because yeah, it's the one thing, it's the one place, just the melody of the city, the nature, the obvious interest because of Japanese animations, of course. But I've had such a long relationship with it now. I have a good base of friends there as well. So yeah, I'd say Japan is the most inspirational place for me, yeah, in terms of my work.
And someone is asking, could you talk a bit about how you see lighting, ceiling, floor playing into the embodiment of the work, particularly in gallery settings?
And do you mean the lighting and ceiling and floor of the gallery?
I'm guessing I think maybe it's when we were talking about the Hepworth show, and that is a gallery that's wonderfully lighted. And maybe they mean also the actual gallery lights, which I play around a lot with in my job. So.
And how that affects the work. Sorry, I missed the first part of the question.
Yeah, well, playing into the embodiment of the work. And I guess that's talking about the change in pigments as well, we were discussing.
I think every space changes the way a show will look, even if they have a similar setting, especially white cube spaces. I often find it's the most subtle changes that a whole show might anchor it hanging around, like just because it has a window or it has skylights that you have to kind of think about the partitions in relationship to that. But I wouldn't. I think it was only recently in the past couple of years I started doing shows that were out of that white cube setting, where it's where things like ceiling, floor, and lighting matter a lot. It's not that they don't matter as much, but they contend with a lot more out of the white cube space. And so doing that in Naples with my German gallery, Gisela Capitan, was a challenge. And then also doing the same with Takaishi Gallery in Kyoto in an old traditional house was eye-opening. So I think I don't know how nitpicky people are about lighting in with work, but those small things do make a big difference in a show. But I would say for every show, I always change what the work needs, because it's often how the space feels as a whole that will dictate those things.
Yeah, I think the juxtapositions with other works in museums, when we're really careful to light pictures in a way that protects the pictures as much, not overexposing them to light, but also the correct lighting can really open up a painting too. And um, yeah. Someone has asked, is any of your work inspired by Midsummer Night's Dream, Fairies and Flowers?
No, it's not. But I like the relationship there.
Do you have a large team supporting your practice, and how much time do you give to research each exhibition?
It depends. Really tiny team, not large at all, maybe 6 people at the moment that help me at the studio with everything other than painting. I do have painting assistants as well, but they don't actually help me paint the paintings, they help me prepare. So, sorry, what was the question?
Pardon? It's yeah.
Oh,
Do you have a team supporting your practice? I think that
yeah,
yeah.
I do. Yeah,
Just there are a couple more questions. We've still got a little bit. We could just take this last one, I think. In the photos of your work in the gallery, there aren't frames. So the space around the painting becomes the de facto frame, really opens up the relationship between a painting and the physical world it resides in. Though a follow-up would have to be thought, the follow-up would be, have you thought of using frames as well?
Oh, actually, I'm very anti-frames for my work in particular, because I feel like they become objects at that moment when you put a frame on a painting, and I want them to breathe beyond that limitation a bit more. And I think I agree, when without a frame, the works kind of bleed into the space and they bleed into the atmosphere. and they hold more potential. With a frame, I think you're calling it an object that, I don't know, I think that's when art becomes object to me. But that's only because for my own practice, a frame doesn't make sense. Especially when you see the sides of my paintings and you can see that the painting is not cautious of the edge at all. So why give it a fabricated edge? Yeah.
Frames have their whole own vocabulary, don't they? Well, I think that's all our questions. So so thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you. I'd like to say thank you for Jane Nordsako and Linda Payne for inviting Jadé and me to speak. And thanks most of all to Jadé. It's been great chatting with you. Thanks for coming along.
Thank you for having me.